Nishtha, the Civil Service Society of Hansraj College welcome you all to our speaker session, which we terminologized as A Girl with Courage is Revolution. And what can be the better day than today? Today is International Women Day, a day on which we honor the sacrifices made by women for the society. And now I would like to introduce you all to a very special person as our chief guest, who in general don't need any introduction. Akanksha Arora ma'am, a 34-year-old UN employee working as an audit coordinator for United Nations Development Program. Ma'am, first of all, I want to say that youth parliaments happens in our colleges. And last year I was the general secretary, and I really hope that I am talking to the next general secretary of United Nations.
Thank you.
So, ma'am, please enlighten us about your journey, how a girl born in Haryana became a coordinator for UNDP and now applying for the world's highest organizational post, that is the United Nations General Secretary. Thank you, ma'am, and over to you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and thank you for having me on this great panel. I always enjoy the opportunity to talk with the next generation of leaders, and I'm sure somewhere on this call is the next Secretary General of the UN as well. So I was born in Rohtak, and I lived in India until the age of 6. At 6, I moved to Saudi Arabia, and then I came back to India at 9. To go to boarding school. And then at 18, I moved to Canada for college. And in Canada, I studied accounting. I became a CPA with PricewaterhouseCoopers. I was doing well in audit. And then suddenly I got a call to be part of the Secretary General, the current Secretary General's management reform team. He joined the organization and he was looking for people to help him with reforming, and my specific portfolio was the financial reforms. So when I joined the UN, I, of course, was thrilled to be part of the UN, and I didn't have ambition to run for this top position of the Secretary General. My decision to run has been influenced by what I've learned while working at the UN. UN was created 75 years ago with a great promise to ensure peace and security in the world, protect human rights, have fair and equitable development, and promote rule of law. But over the last 75 years, the UN has not lived up to its promise. Like, we have record number of refugees, 85 million, the highest since World War II. And half of these are children and women. And they've been living in these conditions for 10 years or more. And what's interesting is that people who are refugees, they end up going into neighboring countries, and these neighboring countries don't really want them. Like, take Syria, for example, like refugees ended up going to Lebanon and Jordan, and those people didn't want them. So they end up living in subhuman conditions, and they're left to fend for themselves. And they end up either being trafficked or smuggled and forced to join terrorist organizations to find sustenance and security for themselves. And this is a human rights abuse. These are vulnerable people whose rights are not being protected, and it's destabilizing the world as a whole because terrorism is rising. And when it comes to development, in 1980, China's GDP was below all but 3 African countries. And over the last 40 years, Africa has received the most significant UN funding for development, like almost 60% funding of all UN has gone into Africa. And look where Africa is today and where China is. So clearly something is not working. And what's interesting is that everyone within the UN system is aware of this. Like, this is not news to anyone within the system that the system is not working, but people have accepted it as normal. So I think what's different about me is that I believe in the UN. I know it's capable of doing such great work that I didn't want to give up on the system. I was like, no, I'm sure with the right leadership, we are capable of fulfilling our promise because we have adequate financial resources. We have the best staff any organization could ask for. What's missing is the leadership. And I think that's what triggered me to run for this position, is because I believe I can offer that leadership. And at a personal level, like when I joined the UN, just few weeks of being there, I got hit by a cab. I was leaving work late on a midnight. It was a snowy day, and I got hit by a cab right outside of work, and I was in the ER for 8 hours. I had turned 30 that year, and like, when you turn 30, you feel like the best of life is ahead of you. You're not really thinking about death, but then that brush with death, and made me realize, like, you can't put off your bigger dreams of making a difference. I've always wanted to help, but I always postponed it. I was like, I'll do it when I accomplish my ABC goal. So I was kind of living a very self-centered life. But then that moment, I was like, you know what, life is so short and I have to make changes in my life. And I promised God, if he could help me get out of that accident, I would dedicate my life to making a difference in the world. Sorry, that's my alarm. Um, Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. So yeah, I think that was one thing. And then when I was in Uganda in 2017 for work, I saw a child eating mud. Like, it was right outside the gas station. I was seeing around the city, and this little girl was eating mud, and there was no one looking after her. It's like people were walking by and absolutely ignoring her. And I think that was like such a traumatizing experience for me. I asked people, like, why is no one there? And no one had any answer. At that time, I just gave her food and cash. But when I came back to New York, I asked one of our executives, like, why can't we do something about this? Like, why is this girl eating mud? And he said, mud has iron, it's good for children. And that's when I knew that this is not the leadership that will make progress, that will give opportunity to people or help elevate suffering in any way, form. So I think those two things made me realize I have to be the change that I want to see in the world. And here we are now having this conversation.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. It's truly inspirational that how you born and brought up in Haryana and went to United Nations. So currently you are working as an auditor coordinator at UNDP. Would you like to elaborate more as how's your job, what you have to do in UNDP?
Yeah, sure. So in my role, I manage internal and external audit of UNDP. And as you know, for any organization that's funded by taxpayer dollars, audit is a significant component. And in my job, I have to manage external audit for entire UNDP, which happens once a year, but it takes 4 months. And then internal audit, which we have 100 internal audits a year on projects, programs, and countries. So I manage all of that, and I ensure that whatever weaknesses they identify, we are implementing it and taking corrective action, changing our processes to address weaknesses and implementing best financial practices.
Ma'am, what are your visions for United Nations and the world if you become a general secretary?
So my vision for the UN is a UN that's a guardian for refugees. Like, refugees are and displaced people are not voters in any country. No politician is asking for their votes. They don't have social media to tell their story. So UN is the only one who can be a guardian for these refugees and make sure that they take care of them and find them home. And the home could be either you repatriate them back to the country, reintegrate them where they are, or resettle them in a new country. So my vision is like that needs to be prioritized and addressed. And when it comes to development, I think it's important to realize that development, we've tried over the last 40 years, different approaches to development. And the one that I'm proposing is grounded in people. Like, we need to give people the tools to succeed. And in 21st century, that's internet and education. Like, that's the biggest equalizer. And once people have that, sky is the limit for them. They can figure out solutions for their family, their community, and country. So that's the development model I'm proposing. And the other thing is, UN right now is considered almost like a castle on the hill. Like, it's exclusive, it's elite. So I do want to make it a very inclusive environment where people of different backgrounds can come and discuss solutions. And it's not just something that's elitist. And my third vision is youth. So half of the world is under 30. That includes all of you on this call. And you are the present and the future of the world. And youth these days are so engaged and so wanting to make a difference and have meaningful contribution in society. And so far, the UN has only been able to tap this talent by asking for donation or advocacy. So I want to expand that and give youth leadership opportunities within the UN so they can bring their creative problem-solving skills and their relentless energy to find solutions to problems, and to also allow them to go to countries where there are humanitarian crisis and actually hands-on be involved. Like that experience would be so fulfilling and enriching to anyone who's able to go. So that's my vision for the UN.
Perfect, ma'am. Next question is about a problem which is prevalent from many decades, and that is the problem in Middle East. Middle East is on fire from many decades, and it's become the breeding ground for all kind of terrorism, human genocidal activities. So, what are your take on this, and how you are going to solve it?
So like you said yourself, Middle East has been like this for decades on end, and we've and I think I'll just start with a case study simple of Libya. Like, Libya is something that happened in 2011, and it was where Security Council swiftly reacted, and look where Libya is today. So I think I don't know how much you guys know about the Libyan history, but after the Arab Spring erupted, UN Security Council said, "Oh my God, Gaddafi might commit a genocide. We have to go do something about it." So we immediately went with a mission to get rid of Gaddafi, and try to bring democracy to a place that really has never had democracy. And now Libya is a country that has two governments. And in fact, right now there's an interim UN government. So I think the solution to the Middle East does include having Middle East people on board, like people from the community, and not like Western people coming and bringing their solutions, because there is a lack of trust and credibility within the Middle East community to think that Western governments have their best interest at heart. That's one thing. And we have to invest in empowering women and children, in protecting women and children and empowering them. And I think investing in that will just enhance a family structure that could then help the community grow and society grow.
Okay, perfect, ma'am. Do you think that government of Gaddafi was better in Libya than the United Nations interim government right now?
That is $1 million question, to be honest with you. In hindsight, um, they all say like Libya was better off under Gaddafi than they are today. And even President Obama said his biggest regret in his entire presidency was Libya. Like, you go and attack them without even thinking what will happen the next day. Like, you haven't planned through it, and look where we are. So yeah.
That is making me to remember a comment made by Donald Trump. He said Iraq was better with Saddam Hussein than right now because it has become very unstable as sectarian conflicts emerge. So, ma'am, my next question is: what are the biggest failures, according to you, that United Nations is facing, and how are you going to change it? The leadership problems or any problem that United Nations is facing in day-to-day life.
So I think the first thing is that we need to show we are not getting the results that we were meant to get, which is neither do we have peace and security or human rights are being protected. So we need to, first of all, prioritize and invest all the resources that we need to make sure that we elevate suffering of people that are being abused, that are having human rights abused, or that are refugees. So that's the first thing, to prioritize those resources. And while they're there, like one thing we have to realize is even if you're feeding them, clothing them, you have to find ways to depopulate these refugee camps. Like you can't have someone being a refugee. So while they're there, we have to invest in educating them, giving them all the tools so they can learn. So when they go back into their community, they can contribute effectively. And when it comes to going back, like you have three options. You can either repatriate, which is go back to your country, or integrate where you existingly are, or resettle. And those options are not extensively discussed. We all know that resettlement, Western countries don't take a lot of people. And the countries that actually take the most are middle-income countries themselves, like Turkey and Uganda. And if middle-income countries are stepping up and taking refugees, then we need to make sure that we give them adequate resources, because they're middle income themselves. So that is something that we need to not just think about, like how do we make them survive, but how do we then make them thrive and achieve their potential and resettle back in life. And I think the other thing, like I said, covered before, is development. Like we really have to move away from this Reaganomics concept of development, where Reaganomics always is like, do things at the top and expect that the results will trickle down at the bottom. And that hasn't happened in development. Like we've given money to institutions in different format, institutions from the West, local institutions, but it hasn't trickled down. And I think that trickle down will only happen if we directly go to the people through internet and education. And the third one is youth. Like I said, you guys are relentless and energetic and so passionate that I think you are the missing link on why solutions are not, on why UN is still not fulfilling its promise. It's because youth are not engaged all over in every profession. There's no age limit. Like youth can do anything. You can make an app, sell it. You can join any profession. There's no age limit. Politics, international organization is the only one where there is a limitation, where young people have something called visitation rights, but not participation rights. They're like, come, see, say hello to us, clap on our speeches, but don't tell us what to do. So I think just changing that dynamic and allowing young people to have leadership positions, meaningful positions would move the needle significantly and solve a lot of challenges and bring creative solutions.
You addressed all the solutions very well, efficiently and effectively. I want to ask one more question. That is, do United Nations need transparency in their work? Is there lots of red tapeism or something like this?
Absolutely. They totally need transparency. I think even for your previous question, one of the biggest challenges, for every dollar they get 30 cents is used for the cause. Like that's a staggeringly bad number. Like that needs to be changed. And we need to have more transparency. And I think this what's interesting about this candidacy is that, of course, I'm being tested. I have to, the whole world is judging me. But the other party who's being tested is United Nations. They promote equality, gender equality, youth equality to the world. So it's their time to practice it now in selecting the next Secretary General. So, and they have to bring transparency in this election process as well. As Secretary General election has always been a hush-hush backdoor decision. So I think there needs to be transparency in that. And that would allow others who are not part of the UN to be part of the solution and help make it more engaging for others as well.
As we have seen, people with disabilities have been left out of developments in many regions and in many discussions for too long. So how are you going to change it? Will you form some other aspects of United Nations, some other agencies of United Nations to address these problems? Because these problems are widely neglected from a long time. How you are going to respond it?
I couldn't agree more with you. Like, you're right, disabled people are absolutely excluded from a lot of opportunities. And I think that especially happens in education. Whenever UN does have schools or all these opportunities, they go to, first of all, only densely populated areas. They don't even go to rural areas. And even when they go to densely populated, it's not that they have an option for disability access and stuff like that. So I think the proposal of having an online learning platform, and with COVID, we've seen that's possible. Like that online learning platform would make it so feasible for disabled people to be part of the solutions and move the needle forward. And in terms of policy, I think one thing that I would love for students like yourself and everyone on the call to take away is there are two aspects to this whole international organization sphere. There's, of course, the decision-making aspect, the policy-making aspect, which is what you guys learned. But equally important, if not more, is implementation. Like, for the first time in the history, we actually have good policies in most areas. What we're lacking is implementation. And because we don't see results in implementation, we keep ending up going back to policy, but the policy is not really a problem. Like, take sustainable development goals, for example. We have good goals, everyone is on board, and now we have 1 decade left to complete it, and that would take all effort into implementation, almost like stop talking and start doing attitude. So I think that's very critical. So with disabled students, it's more we need to invest in giving them access, the tools, and not really policy. And wherever there isn't policy, of course, policy should be developed. From a UN perspective, I believe there's adequate policy written that countries can then implement. It's the implementation that will move the needle.
Okay, perfect. Ma'am, question I found very relevant, and that is it is very well established fact that certain countries has hegemony in the United Nations. So if important decision which are true and that must be enforced are neglected by their veto power and like this. So how it needs reformation and how you are going to change it?
So it is true that when UN was being created, Security Council did allow, gave 5 countries the veto powers, which has created the dynamic that you're explaining. And to change that dynamic, the decision rests with member states. No Secretary General can ever come and tell them how to do it. So it rests with member states. And I think if you read the more on this topic, you'll realize that member states have made decision to limit the use of veto power. So they do limit, and they are 5 of them, so they keep each other in check. And the other thing is that there are 10 elected members, E10, in the Security Council, and they have started to play a very powerful role over the last few decades. Like, they know that they can change certain and influence certain things by informing the working methods of the Security Council. With that being said, I also think a lot of blame goes into Security Council without detailed analysis on was the implementation lacking. And I think implementation is critical. If we start to see implementation done, that would again be 50% of the problem solved.
According to you, what is lacking in the today's leadership in the United Nations uh, organization, and like there are certain problems that are well established. There's a lack of transparency. So what more problems, because you are working in United Nations, you know the ground reality. So what are the problems? Can you please elaborate something on this?
Yeah, sure. So I think your question specifically is when it comes to leadership. So what's interesting is that you have the decision-making bodies, then you have the employees of the UN, which I was part of, and both parties have skin in the game. It's the leadership who is selected on a political appointment basis in more cases than not, and they don't really have a skin in the game. They use UN as a stepping stone to their career in their government, in their national governments, or as a rotation to another position. I think just this example that mud is good for children, it has iron, is very telling of the attitude that you're dealing with. So I think it's a leadership that is not concerned about the people and is more self-serving. That I think is the biggest issue. The other is innovation and technology is lacking. Like, there's so many ways we can bring innovative solutions that would cut the bureaucratic cost, make all the funding go into the program, and it would allow employees to also be more engaged. Like, most of the time employees feel that they're doing something that they did a year before, or it's been going on the same way. So I think having new ways. And the third missing link is actually you guys. Like, I think if even 10% of the leadership was your age group, it would just create a huge movement in a positive direction, because you guys would be so impatient for results that would make a big difference.
We will surely try to drive an awareness campaign for this. Ma'am, when you announced your candidacy for United Nations, the thing which drew our attention was that you will become the first woman to become the United Nations General Secretary. So what is the reason that there are no woman general secretary in general United Nations? What is the reason that women are not getting that place which they should deserve or which they are fighting for?
I agree with you. It's 75 years too late that we have not had a women secretary general. And I think what's interesting is that in 2016, there were 13 candidates presented in that election, and 7 were women, and they are phenomenal women. They had similar profile than the current Secretary General, but UN member states didn't choose a woman at that time. So I think, like I said, this campaign is about values of the UN. Like, do they really believe in gender equality, or do they just talk about it? So I hope that can be rectified this election, and the next Secretary General of the UN is a woman.
Yeah, we really hope this too, ma'am. And it will be an honor for us that we are having interaction with a person who is going to in charge of United Nations General Secretary. Ma'am, our audience wants to know that how General Secretary are. Yes, please, ma'am.
I have another meeting at 6.
Okay. We are
of
just
my. Yeah,
just
sure.
taking the last question, ma'am.
Sure. Okay.
Okay, ma'am. Our last question is that can you please elaborate how general secretaries are selected? What is the election procedure for this?
Absolutely. So UN has 193 countries. They are the ones who actually press the button on who would be the next Secretary General. There are two tests. First of all, the Secretary General has to get two-third vote in the Security Council, and no country has to veto. Once you pass that test, you go into the General Assembly, where you also need um, two-third votes. So his before 2016, for all the secretary generals before, it was always a backdoor decision. You didn't even know the names put forward. You didn't even know anything. It was just backdoor deals. 2016, it became opaquely transparent. And this year, in my candidacy, I'm making it fully transparent because I CC the world on every document. And I think if you go on my website, you are allowed to vote. And when you vote, an email goes to your ambassador to say that you want change, you want a UN that works and fulfills its promise to the world. And I think that's one way to get people involved, because the charter of the UN does read "We the people."
Thank you, ma'am. With this last question, we have come to the end of highly inspirational session with you, and we support our deep regards and for your successful application for the candidacy of United Nations General Secretary. We will also run a campaign for you from tomorrow from our social media handles to support you, to enlighten the whole world about you. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. We wish you all the success and all the luck. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Bye.